The software takes the user to the first section of the Part L specification to be designed, in this case the ground floor slab. This project is a 3-story attached building with an attic dormer. The software presents typical details that need to be measured specifically for this project based on the design decisions made. The designer clicks on the input button next to the typical detail to be measured, and an automated drawing will highlight the dimensions that should be taken by the designer. When the dimensions for the ground floor slab are collated, the designer needs to choose which type of building they are working on, whether it's a bungalow, dormer, story and a half, or multi-story. As our project is 3-story, it is multi-story. The designer saves the dimensions taken and moves to the next part of the project by clicking on Save. The next part of this project to be measured is the intermediate first floor. The software only presents the typical details that need to be measured for this particular project. These dimensions are used by the software to calculate an individual Y factor and by the SAP software to calculate the performance of the building. If the designer is not confident in inputting the correct dimensions, Foresight can provide this service for an agreed fee. The designer is given the same choices as before. In this case, it is 2nd story. The dimensions are saved and the designer is taken to the 2nd floor. If the designer needs to interrupt the input section of the design process, they press the Save button on the last page used. To get back to the position that they were in, they go back into the calculator and use the drop-down button. All the input sections that have been completed will be in green. If the designer is happy with the last input section that was completed, they click on Save, and this information is saved, and the designer will automatically move to the next stage of the project, in this case the dormer roof. The software systematically takes the designer through each part of the building that needs to be measured, ensuring that all the dimensions needed to calculate the Y factor and the performance of the building by SAP are collated. It is important that the designer inputs accurate dimensions into the input boxes as they affect the Y factor and SAP result. When the designer has measured the roof, they are given the option of measuring other roofs, if it is applicable. In this case, there are none. The software takes the designer to corners. This is the only input section where the designer might have to input a 0 for the intern corner. The software cannot determine from the setup if the project has an intern corner. The orientation of the elevations and the position and dimensions of all the openings on these elevations are very important when calculating the performance of a building using SAP. It is important that the designer inputs the orientation of the front elevation first and then takes the orientation of the other elevations to be measured. The software will automatically take the designer to the front elevation first, and they input the width and height of the windows, doors, roof lights and hatches. The software takes the designer to the 2nd elevation, and the process is repeated in the same way for all the chosen elevations. These dimensions are used to calculate the individual Y factor. The designer has now completed the input section of the calculator. They should click Save and then move to the design section.